Assalamu alaikum, everyone. You are listening to episode 34 of the Muhammad Ghailan podcast with yours truly as the host. The timing of this episode happens to coincide with the blessed time of the year. It is Ramadan of the year 1438 according to the Islamic calendar, which is coinciding with the end of May 2017. And what I wanted to do with this episode is use it as an opportunity to share some thoughts about the month itself and what it's about. A lot of us focus on food, a lot of us focus on water, and depending on where you live on the planet, the very first discussion people find themselves engaged in at length is how can you not have food or drink for that long? I mean, if you're living in a place like Northern Hemisphere, let's say Vancouver, Canada, those guys up there are fasting for like 18, 19 hours. Scandinavian areas, they're fasting even longer, I believe. So it's kind of justified. That's the first thing that comes to mind. How can you survive? And if you think about it a little bit more, you'll realize why Ramadan has this transformative power. And it's because it directly tackles this very basic survival instinct driver. You can take everything from people. You know, you could take money, you can take shelter, you can take whatever, but man, you got to get them their food and you got to get them the water. People go crazy over these two things because that's life and death now you're talking about, and it happens within a couple of weeks. People can only survive for so long without access to these things. Now, what this month does is it takes people that are well-to-do, people that have the means, that have access to these things, and it awakens you. It makes you more conscious of your behavior. And a lot of us Muslims who fast throughout the month, by the end of the month when it's over, the first day of Eid, when we go and reach for that glass of water, that bottle of water, that piece of date in the morning, when we go for breakfast, you have a moment of hesitation because you're reflecting, you're thinking, should I be eating right now? Is this right? Shouldn't I be fasting? You have this moment, and that moment represents what that month did to you. It woke you up. Unfortunately, a lot of us, we end up going back into our heedless, somnambulent states, and we go about our days as if nothing happened. What you should be looking at for the month of Ramadan is entering it every year in the elevated state that you left it the year prior, and elevating your state a little bit more this year and exiting it in a state that is higher than the one that you entered it in. Ramadan is a month of improvement. The state of the human being is one that fluctuates, but the trajectory of your station should be going up as you grow older. And that is one, as the Prophet ﷺ said in a hadith, this is one of the most blessed or the greatest blessings that you can have, is to have a long life that was lived righteously. So Ramadan tackles this basic instinct of yours. Imam al-Ghazali, in his book, Revivification of the Islamic Sciences or the Religious Sciences, Ihya Ulumuddin, he has a section where he talks about Babu Kasri Shahwatain, the chapter of breaking the two desires. And the desires he speaks about in it are Shahwatul Batn wa Shahwatul Farj, the desire of the stomach and the desire of the private parts. Now, if you look at a lot of human behavior, regardless of the complexities that we engage in, and try to break it down into its most core foundation, what drives that behavior, you'll find that it often goes down to these two things. We want to put food on the table, and we want to cohabitate with somebody. That's really what it comes down to. And so we construct a lot of norms throughout our lives, throughout our days, that basically go back to serving these two things. And Ramadan is about waking up so that you recognize these two desires for what they are. And it's a time for you to basically put the rider in control of the horse, as opposed to, or the donkey, as opposed to the donkey controlling the rider. In that particular chapter, in Ihya Ulumuddin, Imam al-Ghazali talks about 4 desires. It's not just the 2 of them. And these desires are Shahwatul Batn, so it's the desire of the stomach. Shahwatul Farj, so sexual desire. Shahwatul Mal is the desire for wealth. And Shahwatul Jah, and it's the desire for status. Now, the most basic one of these, if you think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, That's kind of a take on that, but much earlier, of course, than Maslow. And the most basic one that Imam al-Ghazali identifies, and he says, shahwatul batn, it's this desire of the stomach. That's the one that controls the other desires. If you control the desire of the stomach, you'll be able to control all the other desires. And if you don't have control over this desire, everything else will go haywire. And this particular desire, if it's fulfilled, the other desires will manifest themselves. So if you are hungry, and hungry not meaning like, oh, I could eat. We're talking about you, like you're feeling it. It hurts. You're hungry. You do not necessarily at that moment have thoughts about sexual desire or gaining wealth so that you can start a business or things like that, or gaining status, especially status. Status, we're talking about self-actualization. It's the top of the pyramid. You're not thinking about these things. You're thinking about, I need to get something in my stomach now. Otherwise, I'm going to die. I need to drink some water. I need some access to clean water. Now, Ramadan, one of the benefits of it, and that's not the primary purpose. This is one thing that a lot of Muslims, unfortunately, try to explain to non-Muslims about Ramadan by saying that it reminds you of the poor, and that's true. It reminds you of the poor, it reminds you of the needy, it reminds you that you have blessings that a lot of people don't have, and it makes you recognize them. But that is not the purpose of Ramadan. That is a side effect of you engaging in Ramadan. The primary purpose of Ramadan, the primary purpose of fasting, is outlined in the Quran. يا أيها الذين آمنوا كتب عليكم الصيام كما كتب على الذين من قبلكم لعلكم تتقون. O you who believe, fasting has been prescribed upon you, just as it has been prescribed upon the nations that have come before you, so that you may gain taqwa. Taqwa is this fear, as well as awe, as well as conscious awareness. It's this consciousness of the divine, consciousness of God being watching over you, consciousness of your position with regards to God in this world. What are you? So that's what fasting is about. It's a time for you to recognize a lot of different things about your behavior and to focus on them in a way that you would improve yourself. Now, I recently wrote an article, or not recently, I republished an article with regards to one of the things that this time of the year is supposed to help you control, which is the tongue. I mean, the Prophet ﷺ said that if your fasting does not stop you from uttering foul things and lying and stealing and doing all of these things, then God is not in need of you leaving your food and drink. You're just starving yourself. There's no benefit to it. The tongue, however, received extra attention. There's no part of the body that has received as much attention from the beloved ﷺ to warn us about as much as the tongue. Yet it seems that for most of us, there is no part of the body we pay less attention to than our tongues. And in spite of the damage we inflict upon ourselves and others around us, very few of us make a conscious effort to control this piece of flesh that sometimes to make a vow, sometimes it seems to every morning it makes a vow, actually, to get us in trouble one way or another. If each of us takes the time to take him or herself into account about what they've uttered throughout the day, and the possible here and now, as well as the hereafter repercussions of those seemingly effortless breaths of air, we really might end up with anxiety attacks if we really reflected on these things. And this is nothing new. We all know the problem of the tongue. But for some reason, it's just so irresistible to open up our mouths to say what comes to our minds the second it comes up. Very few have actually reflected upon our very anatomy to get a sense of what God has intended for us to do with it. I mean, consider this. And I know this for evolutionary, excited evolutionary promoters out there, this doesn't make sense much for you because you think of the body as a purposeless thing and things are just accidental. But from a Muslim perspective, there's nothing accidental. Everything has a purpose. And consider this, you have 2 ears, 1 mouth. This is a hint for what kind of speech listen ratio we should be striving for. You listen twice as much as you speak, basically. Another one is you have a set of lips, you have a set of teeth. These are two gates, or checkpoints, if you will, before the tongue comes out. The thing about worship and getting closer to God and getting spiritually elevated, it begins with silence. Our relationship with God, the basis of which is through the prayer, is preconditioned by our very conscious act of keeping silent from everything other than the remembrance of God. I mean, if you listen to what the Prophet ﷺ said in one narration, أربع لا تصير إلا في مؤمن الصمت وهو أول العبادة والتواضع وذكر الله تعالى وقلة الشر. 4 qualities do not gather except in a believer: silence, which is the beginning of worship; humility; remembrance of God, the exalted; and minimal wrongdoings. We should reflect upon this virtuous quality of silence. It is interesting that when we are standing before our Lord in prayer and in connection with the metaphysical realm, we can sever this connection if we purposefully speak or talk to anyone. You can invalidate your prayer. If you're in the middle of prayer and someone talks to you and you respond, that's over. That prayer is done. And that includes, for those who may not be aware of this, that includes responding to text messages. You're not able to do, you're not allowed. You cannot use your phone. The great Imam of Hadith and jurisprudence, Abu Layth al-Samarqandi, mentions in his book, Tanbih al-Ghafilin, Alarming the Heedless, that Jesus Christ, peace be upon him, was reported to have said, لا تكثروا الكلام في غير ذكر الله فتقسو قلوبكم والقلب القاسي بعيد عن الله تعالى ولكن لا تعلمون. That do not speak much with other than the remembrance of God, for if you do, your hearts will become hardened, and the hardened heart is far from God, but you're not aware of it. Imam al-Samarqandi also mentions that some of the noble companions used to say, إذا رأيت قساوة في قلبك ووهنا في بدنك وحرمانا في رزقك فاعلم أنك قد تكلمت بما لا يعنيك. If you find inexorability in your heart and weakness in your body, if you find your heart is becoming hardened, you're not feeling the sweetness of faith, you're not feeling this gentleness, and you're finding your body is getting weaker, and deprivation in your sustenance as well, then know that you spoke about that which does not concern you. Hardness of the heart is when hearing the words of God recited, that does not result in any feeling. It is when the mention of the beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam does not generate a deep yearning to be in his company. God tells us in the Quran, إنما المؤمنون الذين إذا ذكر الله وجلت قلوبهم وإذا تليت عليهم آياته زادتهم إيمانا وعلى ربهم يتوكلون. Only those who are believers are those whose hearts tremble when God is mentioned, and when his communications are recited to them, they increase them in belief, and upon their Lord they place their trust. If we find it difficult to get our act together when it comes to our prayer, our fasting, and striving to perform virtuous acts due to weakness in the limbs, we should really recognize that we have been occupying our tongues with that which we should not have. It has been reported that Abu Sa'id al-Khudri, may Allah be pleased with him, said, إذا أصبح ابن آدم سألت الأعضاء كلها اللسان وقلنا يا لسان ننشدك الله أن تستقيم فإن استقمت استقمنا وإن اعوججت اعوججنا. If the son of Adam wakes up in the morning, all the limbs talk to the tongue and say, O tongue, we beseech you by God to be straight. Because if you're straight, we'll be straight. And if you're crooked, we'll be crooked. Given our modern day technological advancements though, our tongues have gained an unprecedented ability to go beyond their immediate vicinity to inflict damage. Although people are talking less and less in a physical sense of the word, our failure to keep our tongues straight is manifesting itself on our fingertips as we text message, tweet, and Facebook post what our tongues would like to say in person. So now we're in a position our predecessors could not have imagined for themselves. Even when word got around about something someone said, its radius of spread was not more than a few kilometers. Now it goes around the globe in an instant and comes back. And furthermore, since we can do it from behind a screen, we now have an ability to say things that we might not if we had to say them in person. This anonymous nature of this medium allows us to utter things that most of us would never even think about doing. We'd block it immediately. To think of the impact that this one has on one's spiritual well-being should make us shudder, really. There are books that have been written about the tongue and its ailments and the need for a believer to control it. And the beloved ﷺ gave a stark warning about the tongue when he said that one would speak a word without paying much attention to it, and it results in a fall into the abyss of hell for 70 years. If we consider our day-to-day interactions and our relationships with relatives and friends and co-workers, the manifest power of the tongue will become apparent. If you think about it, every relationship begins with a word. Every relationship that ends with a word. Words can start wars and words can bring about peace. After all, it is an acceptance of realities underlying words that can bring them into the fold of Islam, bring a person into the fold of Islam and take them out of it. In this day and age of so many people screaming for their rights to speak freely, very few are recognizing that this freedom, just like any other freedom, comes with an immense responsibility. Sadly, even fewer exercise the right to stay silent. Whatever happened to freedom of silence? I get your right to freedom of speech, but what about freedom of silence? You do not have to say anything that comes to your mind. Sometimes you should just be quiet. What's wrong with that? There's a Muslim wisdom about silence that is quite profound. And it says, في الصمت 7,000 خير وقد اجتمع ذلك في 7 كلمات في كل كلمة منها 1,000 أولها. And so just to translate it for you guys, in silence are 7,000 measures of good, and these have all been gathered in 7 phrases, each of which contains 1,000 measures of good. أولها أن الصمت عبادة من غير عناء. The first one is that in silence is worship without exertion. That's amazing. You know, all acts of worship, if you're praying, you have to get up and physically pray. If you're fasting, you have to restrain yourself from food. If you're paying your charity, you have to get up, take some money out, do it. Like, there's actions involved in all of these actions of worship. But when it comes to silence, الصمت عبادة من غير عناء. Silence is worship without exertion. والثاني زينة من غير حلي. The second phrase is in silence is adornment without jewelry. If you reflect a lot on people that are silent, people talk about, that person is mysterious and that person. There is a type of awe effect that comes about from someone that is silent and just sitting there. A lot of us don't recognize that that's why they have this awe thing about them. Especially when it comes to scholars, shuyukh, when they sit there silently, there's something about them that creates an awe-inspiring feeling within you. That's from their silence. Adornment without jewelry. وَالثَّالِثُ هَيْبَةٌ مِّن غَيْرِ سُلْطَانٍ. So you look beautiful without jewelry, and then you have awe without power. That's the third one. وَالرَّابِعُ حِصْنٌ مِّن غَيْرِ حَائِطٍ. The fourth one is, it's a fortress without a wall. Think about it. If you don't speak, if you don't say anything, you're protecting yourself. You're in a protected state because nobody's got anything to say against you. You haven't said anything. No one can take your words and twist them if you haven't produced words to be twisted. والخامس الاستغناء عن الاعتذار إلى أحد. And the fifth one is a freedom from need to apologize to anyone. If you haven't said anything that offends anyone, you don't have to apologize to anyone. والسادس راحة الكرام الكاتبين. The sixth one is rest for the noble record keepers. So in the Islamic tradition, we believe that you have the angels that accompany you that they write your actions. And so you're giving them a break. They no longer have to keep writing everything that you utter. وَالسَّابِعُ سِتْرٌ لِعُيُوبِهِ. And the seventh one is a veiling of one's faults. It's like Imam Ali radiallahu anhu said in one occasion that if somebody comes up new that shows up, if they speak, I'll know who they are right away. And if they don't speak, you'll need to give me to the rest of the day, to the end of the day, to figure them out. And the reason for that is because now he has to focus on that person's behavior. Their deeds matter more. Furthermore, if you're not speaking, you're not exposing your faults. Whereas if you speak all the time, I know some of you guys who listen to this, you engage in, one of the problems you recognize about yourself is that you talk too much. And it's always, my mouth gets me in trouble all the time, you think. And so one of the things you can pick up from this is, if you stop talking so much, you don't have to apologize so much. And if you stop talking so much, you won't have to expose your errors, your shortcomings so much. I mean, it makes one wonder how much of a peaceful world we would have if everyone managed to learn how to restrain their tongues. Instead of clamoring for, I want to say whatever that comes to my mind. I mean, if you want to reflect, because of the timing of recording this, words do matter. And it's because of words that people like this buffoon that's now at the head of the United States government, Donald Trump, because of words, he's now opened the floodgates of, before people experienced bigotry in the sense of restrained bigotry, but now it's all out bigotry. And it's because of words that he said, opening the floodgates, allowing people to behave in ways that, or feel like they can behave in ways that no longer are going to be accountable for. And now people are using freedom of speech as cover up for, just be an unrestrained Nazi. It's really an interesting time that we're living in. And all of this is just produced by words. If you don't think words have power, just reflect on that and look at what's going on in the world today, just using words. All the revolutions against oppressive tyrants throughout our history until today and possibly into the future, we have all these revolutions against that, but we don't have one revolution. And it's the greatest oppressive tyrant of all, and it's our tongue. You have to have a revolution against the tongue, and that's what Ramadan is about in one sense. It's giving you a time to wake up, become conscious, and have this active revolution against your tongue. So while you watch, the hardest thing about Ramadan is not restraining from food and drink. It's watching over your behavior. That should occupy your time so much that you actually forget about your hunger and thirst. Because I remember back in the day, we used to have this fastathon at my university when I was in the MSA. And when we had people participate in it, non-Muslims participate in it, we used to give them a list of things that they can no longer engage in. Because the food and the drink thing is easy. You don't have to, I don't have to give you a list. But when it comes to other activities that you can't engage in, we used to have them for iftar afterwards, because that was just part of the deal. And then ask them, can you tell us what was your experience like? And aside from the immediate, I found water maybe a little bit was hard. I didn't realize that I didn't need to eat as much as I was eating, and water was a bit difficult. But they always dismissively kind of just mentioned it a little bit, and they just delved into the other issues. I had no idea how much I cussed. I had no idea how much I was backbiting people and trash talking people. I had no idea how I was just insulting individuals and mocking this person or that person, and they found that during the day it became more difficult. That was the actual difficult part of fasting, controlling their tongues. It's such a loose cannon. So this is the first practical thing I wanted to give you guys for Muslims who are engaged in this, and non-Muslims listening who would like to engage in this if you want to try this out. The food and the drink is the easiest part of this. You get up before the sunrise, before the break of dawn. Not sunrise, the break of dawn is earlier than that. So you get up before the break of dawn, you have your breakfast, you have your water, you have whatever, and then you restrain, abstain from food and drink until sunset. But the main thing that you want to watch out for during the day is your tongue. Mockery is not allowed, backbiting is not allowed, foul language is not allowed, and you just engage in these and you'll actually notice a change of state, and you will notice a change of your presence around people as well. So that's the first practical thing. The second practical thing that I wanted to share with you guys, and I'm only sharing it now because I've been doing it for a while, and I took to heart an advice that there was a story of a man who went to a scholar, and he said to him, can you tell, my son is always eating a lot of chocolate, and can you just tell him to restrain from it because it's not good for his health? And so the scholar and this kid used to go to the mosque all the time and study with the scholar, and the dad was waiting to hear about, like, oh, so what'd you learn today? And for a month, nothing. And then eventually at the end of the month, he goes to the teacher, to the sheikh, and he says, like, I asked you to do this and you haven't yet, like, what's going on? And so he said, no, today I'm going to do it. So he does it. And the kid stops because of the advice. Now, the dad was confused. Like, why? Why did you not do this earlier? Why did you take a whole month? And he said, I did not want to give advice or to give a counsel that I myself could not follow. And I had a problem with chocolate, and I wanted to engage in abstaining from it and hold myself into account and make sure that I'm practicing what I'm preaching before I give the advice, the counsel. And because I'm able to practice what I preach, it manifests itself in the way that I give that advice. And so it helps others to recognize that I'm not just saying things just as lip service, but I've done it, and so now I don't want to be somebody who's saying to people to do things that I'm not doing myself. And so that's kind of why I'm sharing this now, because I've been doing this for a while, and I could tell you that the transformation of your heart, if you do this, is going to be baffling. You're going to find yourself experiencing a lot of emotions. You're going to feel, the best description I can give it is, you're going to feel like your chest is going to be too small because of the emotions that are going to overwhelm you. So that's just your word of warning before you engage in this practice. But the practice is, and it's really, it's something that the Prophet ﷺ used to do, but very few of us engage in. He ﷺ used to pray for everyone, including his enemies, while they were fighting him. During battle, he would pray. He would ask God. He's like, Allahumma ighfir li qawmi fa innahum la ya'lamun. Oh Allah, please forgive my people because they don't know what they're doing. They don't recognize they don't recognize that they're fighting the Prophet. If they understood what that meant, they would not be fighting the Prophet. So he was praying for them because of that. And we're living in a time right now where everyone is looking for justice. They want retribution for being wronged. But what if we asked ourselves, what would the Habib sallallahu alaihi wasallam do? Our behavior is not going to coincide with what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam would do. So every Ramadan I tell people, and I used to give this counsel at the mosque when I was working as an imam there, start a practice. In Ramadan, what a lot of us do is we engage in very intense acts of worship. So a lot of us like to, I'm going to recite the Quran, the whole Quran in a month, and then we just put it aside, put it on the shelf, let it collect dust for the rest of the year. We pray at night, and then, just for a month, and then we engage in heavy acts of worship, and we burn out by the end of the month, and we can't sustain much of it, and so we just leave it, and then we go back to our old ways, our old habits. What I tell people to do now is, you can engage in all of these things, but I want you to pick up one action item, one practice that you engage in, and you make a vow that you will continue to do this action. And that's why it has to be a small action, something sustainable, something that you can uphold yourself to and into account so that you can do it for the rest of your life. This is something you're going to pick up and never drop again. So take one thing and do it. And the one thing I wanted to suggest for you guys to do aside from the usual practices that you engage in during Ramadan, I recommend that you make a vow and stick to doing this thing every day, either after Subh prayer, the morning prayer, or after Isha. And make a prayer, make a dua, in which you ask God not to take into account anyone who wronged you that day, because you have forgiven them. You have forgiven them. You ask Allah, please, today, anybody that has wronged me, anybody that has insulted me, anybody that has tried to oppress me in any way, I forgive them. I don't want them to be taken into account, so please do not take them into account on my behalf. I don't want anything from it. Please forgive them and ask God to grant them guidance and success in this world and the next. Not just forgive them, but oh God, please guide them, show them the way, elevate their stations, all of the positive things that you can think of. Pray for them actively, not just for forgiveness, but for whatever it is that they're seeking. Grant them success. Pray for people. It's really easy for us to pray for the obvious choices. You know, those who are close to us, those who are oppressed in the world, but pray for others as well. Those who are not so obvious. I mean, the beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam commented on a man. There was a man that entered into a mosque one day, and the companions were sitting, and he sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, that man is of the people of paradise. And Ibn Umar radiallahu anhu followed him to find out why. And he spent like 3 days trying to figure this out. And eventually he had to ask them outright, what is it? What is it that you do? Because I don't see that you pray at night. I don't see that you're some extra righteous person. There's nothing ritualistically apparent about you that would make you look like you should be of the people of paradise. So why would the Prophet ﷺ say that about you? And the man himself said, I don't know what it is, but I could tell you one thing. Every night before I go to sleep, I inspect my heart, I check my heart, and I clear any ill feelings or animosities that I have against anyone. And I consciously make that clearance. And one of the ways to consciously make it is to pray for people. Pray for the wayward, pray for those far away from God to get them closer to Him. Because you never really know. You never know who's in a high station with God, but doesn't appear that way to us. I mean, the Prophet ﷺ made a prayer that transformed Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. The story of his Islam is an inspiring one. I mean, the Prophet ﷺ used to pray, Allahumma ansur al-Islam bi ahabbi al-umarain. He was making a prayer, oh Allah, please support this religion with the most beloved of the two Umars for you. And the two Umars were Amr ibn al-Hakam, who was Abu Jahl, and Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu. And Umar ibn Khattab radiallahu anhu was on his way with his sword. He sheathed his sword and he was on his way to kill the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam when that prayer was finally answered. And it transformed him from the oppressor that he was. He was actively engaged in the torture of Muslims. I mean, really think about this. He was participating actively and personally in the torture of Muslims in Mecca. But his heart was transformed because of the prayer of the beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Do not underestimate the power of dua, of prayer, and do not discount anyone from that power. There's nobody that is outside of the dominion of God. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala could transform the hearts of the most hardened people, like we have in the story of that man who killed 99 people. So we're talking about a serial murderer. And when his heart was transformed, he was seeking forgiveness and he made all the efforts to be forgiven. So make this prayer, make Ramadan this opportunity for you where you dedicate your dua to the salvation and success of others. Because in doing so, I mean, a lot of people don't recognize this, but look, Islamically speaking, we believe in the existence of angels. We believe in the existence of demons. There's something called the ghaib, the unseen. We believe in all of these things. And we're not believing them as lip service. These are realities. They're there. So in your presence, when you're praying, angels are around you. Angels of the morning and angels of the evening are changing shifts. You know, when you go to pray subh in the morning, The evening shift is ascending and the morning shift is coming down, and they're asking, what did you leave this person doing? Oh, we left him or we left her praying. So angels are around you. And when the angels hear you making prayers for people, they start to make a prayer on your behalf, and they say, and the same for you. وَلَكَ الْمِثْلِ. So make Ramadan an opportunity where your charity extends beyond giving money and giving food to people. Make it also a charity of dua. And take that practice with you for the rest of your life. What you'll find, people talk about, love of humanity, let's love humanity and all these things. There is nothing that is going to transform your heart and expand it to the degree that it can actually encompass the love of everyone, which was the type of love that the Prophet ﷺ had. Why would the Prophet ﷺ pray for people like that? It's because his heart was so expanded. The way to expand your heart is to actually engage actively in expanding the heart. And the way to do it is to pray for people actively, to seek the benefit that they would, to seek them to have the benefits that they seek, to seek that they would be successful in this world and the next, and to almost kind of rely on the angels to make the prayers for you on your behalf. So if you have angels praying for you, what do you need to do? Like, why do you care? Why do you need to make the prayers for yourself? Make it for other people. You'll find a transformation. I guarantee you, it's going to take a little bit, but by the time you finish Ramadan, you're going to have a transformation that you've never felt before. So that's the second thing I wanted to talk about today. The third and final thing I want to talk about, and just to finish off, is with regards to the sanctity of time. Ramadan is a time of fasting for a lot of people. We can recognize that. But there is a significant number of Muslims who may be unable to fast, and that could be due to a number of reasons. A lot of it has to do with health usually. So you have people that have diabetes who have to control their sugar and insulin levels or whatever. And so they have to sustain particular levels of their blood. So they can't. They cannot fast. So they expiate their fast that way. In other ways. You have also pregnant women and nursing women. They also can't fast. Just as a word for pregnant women, there's a beautiful article that was shared with me on Twitter about pregnancy and the beauty of it as actually being also an act of worship. So don't discount pregnancy or feel bad about your pregnancy as something that is preventing you from an act of worship. It is an act of worship in itself. But while you're pregnant, you can't fast. I mean, one of the things that, I've heard some people try to fast. Do not try to fast. It's harmful to the fetus. It's harmful to the development of the fetus. You place the fetus at long-term risk for diabetes, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, and also mental health disorders. I mean, there's a lot of problems with restricting food for pregnant women. So do not, don't even think about it. Also, menstruating women, that's the time when you're not fasting. Necessity to be on lifelong medication. So you have some patients who have, let's say, epilepsy, and so they have to be on epileptic seizure drugs. And these drugs have to be taken at regular intervals, and they control the levels of neurotransmitters in the brain so that you do not end up in epileptic seizures. And so those people can't fast either. And there's multitudes of reasons why you can't fast, and you have to, accept them for what they are. And it could be lifelong conditions, and that's fine. Your inability to fast should not be mistaken as a dismissal of the whole month of Ramadan, though. Look at it this way. The month of Ramadan tackles this basic survival instinct of yours about food. It controls your food intake, and so you become conscious and aware of your food consumption and your water consumption. But don't make the month about the food per se in that way. Look at the way that it transforms you through control of food. You should still be able to control that. You should still have this conscious awareness of your food intake while you're not fasting. So this month is not really about fasting and feasting. Even after the sun sets, the whole month, the time itself is sacred. It remains holy. So you may not be able to fast, but you should continue to observe the sanctity of time. So I wanted to give you a couple of reminders for those who are unable to fast for whatever reason. Number one, maintain a routine of getting up for suhoor with the family and approach your daily schedule as if you're fasting. You're not fasting, but approach your daily schedule as if you're fasting, where you break your fast at iftar, at sunset with everyone. You get up before the break of dawn with everyone to have suhoor with everyone. And during the day, don't change your behavior and the things that you observe while you're fasting. People talk about this Christmas spirit. I mean, this is the annoying thing about this. You know, people talk about the Christmas spirit. The Christmas spirit is a product of how people change their behavior, how they observe the time of the year, their perception of it itself. A lot of things happen during that time where it's quite infectious. You can feel it in the atmosphere. You need to maintain the Ramadan spirit. You need to recognize this is not a commercial holiday, Ramadan. This is an actual sacred time of the year. This is the time when the Quran was revealed. This is the month of Quran. So you need to recognize the sanctity of this time and change your daily habits, even though you're not fasting, but try the best you can to engage and be part of what everybody's doing. That involves you controlling your relationship with food so that it's a tool for you, for those who are unable to fast. Food is a means. Don't make it the end. So when you eat or drink during the day, that's the second thing now. When you eat or drink during the day, try not to do it publicly if possible. There's really no need for you to advertise your inability to observe the fast. You know, it's and this, I got some responses for this because I posted this on Facebook and I wanted to address the comments about that. Don't advertise it. There's no need for you to go to a food court at the mall or go to a restaurant or go to a coffee shop and hang out over there and have your coffee and stuff during the month of Ramadan. If you're going to eat, just order takeaway. You don't need to keep doing these things publicly. You have to change the perception, like your perception of this month. This is a sacred time. I don't need to engage in this as I normally do. I need to recognize it. So the way I interact with food is also going to be changed. Third of all, engage in all other acts of worship that are permissible for you, including the litanies to remember God and invocations. So, okay, you may not be able to fast, but this is also the month of Quran. This is the month of remembrance. So engage in everything else that you're able to engage in to whatever degree you're able to, whatever energy levels allow you to. And fourth, recognize that this is a month of the Quran. Overall, if you have extra energy when you're not fasting because you're eating and you're able to nourish your body, then if you're able, dedicate extra effort to it. Instead of just reciting and completing the Quran once, try to do it twice or 3 times. I mean, so the idea here is that really give this time its due attention. It's important. And the reason this is important is because, and for Muslims in the West, those of you listening to this, if you're living in the UK, the US, Canada, wherever you are in the West, you have to create an environment, especially at home, because that's really where you feel it. I mean, you know, you go out in the West, you don't really feel Ramadan. You're in Australia, New Zealand, you're in Canada, the States, wherever you're at, the UK. It's not really, unless you're in a place that's just like a literal Muslim neighborhood that they transformed the whole place. For a lot of us, we don't experience it outside. So you have to create a behavioral change. You have to create an environment at home where the children, if you have kids at home, they recognize this is not any regular old time of year. When they go out, it's Ramadan. We're not just going to go and hang out at the food court and eat right there because it's Ramadan. You know, we need to recognize that. They need to grow up recognizing that this is not some regular time of year. It's the month in which the Quran was revealed. The impact needs to be imprinted on the heart. You know, this is really a practical way of setting an overall metaphysical focus of the family. You recognize God's command and the sanctity of time. It sets up a proper holistic understanding of what Ramadan is about, which unfortunately has been reduced to be just about food and drink. I used to get, and I still to this day, I still get messages from parents telling me about their teenage kids, teenage sons and daughters. Oh, my daughter, my son, 17, 18, 19 years old, they're not really, excited about Islam, or they're having all these doubts and stuff. And we've reduced this religion to this just rational, didactic, or polemic. Let's just have an argument about proving God exists, or that the Prophet ﷺ is a true prophet and the Quran is the word of Allah. And we just engage in these rational gymnastics that we like to play with each other. And I gotta tell you, although we have what I believe to be the truth, I don't think you can reduce Islam to just an argument. This is something that has to be imprinted in the heart. And the way that it gets imprinted in the truth of this religion is not imprinted in the heart through argument. Imam al-Ghazali and all of the other scholars of theology in the Islamic tradition have all talked about this. You do not attain certainty in this religion by rational argumentations. These are supposed to be gates. These are supposed to be keys to the gates to enter into this religion. But then beyond that, for you to set in a certainty about it, you have to engage in practice. You have to experience this religion, because you don't have access to revelation other than through the Prophet ﷺ. And to gain access to the truth of it, you have to practice it. And for you to have kids where you do not ensure that this time of year is looked at with awe, with reverence, that this is a different time. We need to recognize it for what it is. And even though I'm not fasting, I'm still taking the effort and I'm changing my behavior to show that this is not any regular time of year. Kids grow up in an environment, they're already growing up in an environment that is a non-Muslim environment by and large. What is the Muslim population? It was like 1 or 2% in Canada and the States and Australia. Like, we're not a big, significant portion of the population to make such an impact that would create something akin to the Christmas spirit that we see all over the place during Christmas time. So you have to engage in it. You have to be conscious of the effort with all of these things. Now, there was a comment that was posted on this in my Facebook page on this, and the comment was basically about why hide anyone's ability to fast. I never understood this advice, as if there are people going out of their way to flaunt their meals. Perhaps more able people should see this and they wouldn't behave so ignorantly towards those with valid excuses. Our Lord sees what's public and private, so to counsel people to hide their eating from others actually makes it about the human gaze. I just don't see why a menstruating woman, for example, should be holed up somewhere nibbling in private because one of us thinks she's being audacious. It's the same logic that demands non-Muslims not to eat in front of us. We should accommodate those with exceptions, not vice versa. Allahu A'lam. Okay, valid point, but I want to respond to one thing about that. This is not about the human gaze. This is about your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is a difference between public and private. Saying that you should hide your eating, or not so much hide it, but don't make an effort of, or don't do it regularly like you do it on regular times of the year, where you go sit at a food court or sit at a coffee shop or whatnot, to recognize that there is an impact publicly to that behavior. The Prophet ﷺ distinguished between public and private, and he says it in a hadith: "Kullu ummati mu'afa illa al-mujahir." All of my ummah is going to be forgiven for any sins that they commit, except one type of person will not get that forgiveness. It's one who flaunts it, one who does it publicly. Now, if you're unable to fast, you're not sinning, because this is something outside of your control. Health problems, whatever the case may be, you're not able to fast. But you should still recognize that the public and the private are two different spheres, and there is an impact. When you do something in public, that says something about how your metaphysical foundation or your metaphysical relationship with Allah is. As much as we may not like to hear this, when the Prophet ﷺ says that if you sin publicly, yes, it means you don't care about what people think. It also means you don't care about what Allah thinks with regards to how people see you. I'll say that again. If you're sinning, and I'm not talking about you unable to fast, I'm talking about just an open sin. Someone who drinks, but they drink in private. They're hiding their drinking. That person has a low opinion of the people, because they don't believe that the people will forgive that person. They don't want the public, they don't want to be ostracized in public. but they have a higher opinion of Allah because they still hope in Allah's forgiveness. They're still hiding this thing. They're ashamed of it, so they don't want to do it. You're unable to fast. It's not something that you should be ashamed of. It's a condition outside of your control. It's not about shame, but you're still recognizing that this time is sacred and there's a lot of Muslims engaged in this, and you want to show your recognition of the sanctity of time in whatever way you have possible. And the way you do it, not by demanding others. And this is, I really want to clear this, make this as clear as possible. This is not about imposing upon other people, hey, don't fast or don't eat in front of me or whatever. It's not about other people. I'm talking about you as an individual, as a free agent Muslim who just happens to have a condition, they're unable to fast because of it. You still want to show to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that I still want to recognize this time in some way. And I know that this month revolves around this concept of controlling this relationship that I have with food. So I'm going to change my behavior a little bit. And yeah, normally I like to go sit at coffee shops and have my coffee and have my dessert and whatever. But during this month, I'm going to abstain from that. I'm not going to do that because I want to control that type of behavior. I'm not able to stop it, to stop eating, but I can certainly order takeaway. I don't have to go sit at the restaurant and eat. I'm not going to go sit at a food court in the mall and eat. I'm going to change my behavior so that I recognize the sanctity of this time. That's what this is about. It's not about judgment. Yeah, Muslims need to recognize if there are Muslims who are judging others for eating, you need to recognize there are multitudes of reasons why people may not be eating, may not be fasting. And they're valid reasons. And you are in no position to judge that person. And you should be educated into recognizing that you don't know the whole story with that individual and why they may not be fasting. So that's not about that. It's about you as an individual who happens to not be able to fast. What should you do to facilitate your creation of a Ramadan type of environment where you recognize the sanctity of this time? Well, one of the things you do, if you're able to, I'm not talking about people that need to consume the food at a certain time because they have a schedule or whatever. I'm talking about if you're able to, change your approach to your eating so that you make a conscious recognition that this is a sacred time. That's what this is about. I hope that makes sense. I hope that clears it up. But yeah, this is a blessed time of the year. I really hope that you're experience an elevation from it. I pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept your fasting and prayers and transforms the hearts and expands them and elevates your stations in this world and in the next. I think we'll leave it at that, guys. This month is going to be an interesting month for sure. So I hope you make the most out of it. For those of you who are unaware, you can check me out on Twitter. Handle is at Muhammad Gilan. Facebook page is Dr. Muhammad Gilan. And you can find my writings and recordings of this podcast at andalusonline.org, as well as Andalus Book Club. Just a final word about Andalus Book Club. We are taking a break for the month of Ramadan, but we will begin, inshallah, right after with a very intense book that I may actually do more than one webinar on because it's quite heavy content. I think we'll leave it at that, guys. Subhanakallahumma bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant. Astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.